Quand j'étais jeune,
when I was young, well, we were told that World War I was a consequence of the Imperial War.
impérialiste, et que l'attentat de Sarajevo,
And the attack on Sarajevo wasn't important.
En réalité,
However, the recent studies showed that World War II was the immediate cause of the assassination at Sarajevo.
l'attentat de Sarajevo.
June 28, 1914, a young Serbian nationalist, Gavrilo Princip, murders the heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Franz Ferdinand, and his wife Sophie. At that time, the Austro-Hungarian Empire governed Bosnia-Herzegovina, a multi-ethnic southern province of Slavs. At the same time, the small kingdom of Serbia, supported by Russia, dreams about a Serbian flag floating freely over Sarajevo.
It started with a few gunshots, and we ended up in the World War. You should remember that World War I was a conflict between blocs. They were allies. You press one button and the domino falls. Boom, 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 and it's on. The war starts.
Paul Gradvohl, historian and specialist in the history of Central Europe, considers the traditional account on the origins of World War I as being incomplete, especially the assassination in Sarajevo.
We're struggling here with the question, why the investigation has never been completed.
Just weeks after the assassination, the whole of Europe is at war. The police investigation will never be finished, but questions remain. Was the murder of Franz Ferdinand a spontaneous act of young nationalists? Or was it commissioned? Who wanted war? Paul Gradvohl travels to Sarajevo to finish the investigation opened a century ago. He decides to study his own roots as well. It is here, in Sarajevo, where his family started their long journey. Paul arrives at the crime scene. The first gunshots of World War I were fired here.
The restitution from Austria, the trial of Gavrilo Princip and the others.
So here we have the case files. Gavrilo Princip's file. As soon as we learned that Franz Ferdinand intended to visit Sarajevo, some were saying that the date was badly chosen. The day when Franz Ferdinand visited Sarajevo, the Serbs were celebrating the anniversary of the Battle of Kosovo, the Battle of Blackbird's Field, a very important battle. The visit was seen as a provocation.
Et donc ça a été considéré comme une provocation.
Franz Ferdinand was informed about it. He hesitated for a long time, but in the end decided to come to Sarajevo on that precise day. They came to Sarajevo on the 25th of June. They were staying in Ilija, not far from Sarajevo.
This is the house where Franz Ferdinand and Sophie spent their last night on the 27th of June, 1914.
On the 26th and the 27th of June, Franz Ferdinand attended the military manoeuvres.
Il s'agit de grandes manœuvres.
Those were the regular military manoeuvres that took place every 2 or 3 years in different parts of the monarchy.
De la monarchie.
He observed the battle simulations of 2 Alpine battalions. Those practices showed that the monarchy had been preparing the defense of Sarajevo. His wife Sophie didn't attend the practices. She was visiting different institutions, schools, Catholic churches, humanitarian organizations.
La visite officielle de Sarajevo.
The official visit in Sarajevo was scheduled on Sunday, June 28th. That's when everything became complicated.
Trebalo je u 10 sati da
At 10 o'clock, the cortege was planned to arrive at the town hall for this official reception.
prijem. 6 vozila se uputilo I
While 6 cars were leaving, 6 conspirators awaited them at the quays, armed with grenades, pistols and cyanide.
opremljeni pištoljima, opremljeni bombama, opremljeni cijankalijem.
The authorities wanted to show that the residents of Sarajevo welcomed enthusiastically the arrival of Franz Ferdinand to the city.
Prvi
The first conspirator was Mehmed Basić.
Bašić. On nije uopće reagirao.
But he didn't react at all.
Kasnije njegovo objašnjenje je bilo da jednostavno
Later on he explained that the police officer was standing behind him and he couldn't do anything.
mogućnosti da izvrši atentat. Druga osoba koja
The second conspirator was Vasil Čubrilović.
bio je Vasa Čubrilović.
He also didn't execute the attack. Later he explained that he felt pity for Sophie.
Sofije.
On the road to the town hall, next to the bridge Čumurija, Nedeljko Čabrinović was the first one who dared to act.
Kad je već
The moment when the car was approaching, he took out the grenade and he hit it against the metallic pole. That's how you had to activate the grenades at that time. And you had to wait 12 seconds for the explosion.
on nije čekao.
But he didn't wait.
Nedeljko je bacio bombu.
Nedeljko threw the grenade, but since the car had already passed, it was a cabriolet with the rounded back.
Zaobljen zadnji dio. Bomba se skotrljala.
The grenade bounced off and fell under the following car.
Sljedeći auto u koloni koji je nailazio.
La bombe explose.
The bomb goes off in front of the car that was following in the cortege and hurt Lieutenant Colonel Marizzi.
Von Merizzi.
Tada je Nedeljko preskočio zid Miljacke.
At that moment, Nedeljko jumped to the river Miljacka to win some time to swallow cyanide.
Poskakali za njima, pa su mu glavu gurali u...
The police immediately jumped after him and pushed his head under the water several times in order to weaken the effect of the poison.
Uhvatili Nedeljka, tetka moja je gledala.
They arrested him in front of my
Pa
aunt.
niti je smjela da se javi.
Then came the interrogations.
The first time
When the idea of the attack came to me was straight after I was expelled from Sarajevo.
The authorities banned him from staying in Sarajevo after his participation in the workers' strike. And I think that's the reason why he could integrate the circles of people ready to plan the assassination.
Ici, Cvetko Popović.
Cvetko Popović didn't shoot.
On je imao mnogo izgovora.
He had plenty of explanations.
Da jednostavno nije bilo pogodno.
He claimed that the conditions weren't favorable and that two detectives were following him.
He told us how he experienced it. The cortege was passing by, the quays were crowded, he was young and excited, and he didn't know how to shoot well. The car passed by quickly. That was it.
But the cortege passes by too quickly for Gavrilo Princip. He doesn't have time to aim and shoot. Trifko Grabes is badly positioned in front of the town hall. He cannot react.
Franz Ferdinand is received in the mayor's office, where he arrives in a dreadful mood.
The mayor Čučić, who is waiting for them, starts immediately his prepared speech. Franz Ferdinand, known for his explosive temperament, starts to tackle the mayor of Sarajevo, saying, "So this is how you receive me in your city, with a bomb."
He's very unpleasant with the mayor and the various delegations that receive him as the member of the imperial family.
Eventually calmed down by the entourage, he said, "You may continue," and the protocol exchanges took place. At the time of leaving the town hall, Franz Ferdinand said, "Lieutenant Colonel Maritzi was injured during the attack while being in my service. I will not leave Sarajevo without visiting him first at the hospital." And he decided to change the itinerary. They planned the following scenario. The cortege would dash along the river to get to the military hospital. However, things didn't go as they thought.
Comme on les a prévus. Gavrilo Princip s'est posté.
Gavrilo Princip positioned himself at the corner of the eastern quay of Franz Joseph Street.
By lack of luck, and also a coincidence that changed the European history, the driver didn't notice that there was a change of the address.
So the front escort is already following the new itinerary. The driver stops the car behind me because he had to make a U-turn.
And as it happens, this young man is only a few steps away from the car. He shoots and hits the Duchess Sophie first, and then hits the great-grandfather in his uniform at the neck level.
On a ici le premier titre sur l'assassinat.
And that's how the first question emerges. Was there a plot?
Y a-t-il complot?
Istraga
The investigation was supposed to establish the origins of the conspirators. Who was behind them and what was their objective?
attentata s kojim ciljem.
La question
The immediate preoccupation after the attack is to discover who was behind it.
qui est à l'origine de l'attentat, sachant que les auteurs,
Bearing in mind that the arrested Gavrilo Princip and Shabrinovic are Serbs or of Serbian origins. Were they just some lunatics who prepared an attack alone in the name of the pan-Serbian ideology or the Yugoslavian ideology? Or is it the Serbian government that organised the assassination? So this is Gavrilo Princip. What do we have inside here? He's 19. Is he married? No. When was he born? 13th of July, 1894.
My grandfather and Gavrilo Princip's father lived in the same house, and their children grew up together. After high school, Gavrilo went to college in Sarajevo, and then he left to Belgrade.
The historians tell us that once he crossed the border with Serbia, he kneeled to kiss the Serbian soil.
We knew nothing about his activities. He didn't speak to anyone, and the family knew nothing.
Now we have the fingerprints. It's important to remember that when he was in Serbia in 1912, during the Balkan Wars, he volunteered to the army, but he wasn't taken on. Major Vojislav Tonkosic, who received him for the admission interview, told him, "You're too small and you're not apt for any kind of combat."
He was rather small and not very strong.
Many believe that this is what made Gavrilo Princip look for an opportunity to prove that he was not weak. And capable of such a memorable act.
Everywhere I went, people were treating me as somebody weak, while I was not.
So here's the American suitcase where we can find things we know about and others not.
Des choses dont on sait ce que c'est, des choses dont on sait pas ce que c'est.
Here's a photograph that was taken by Turk in Sarajevo.
Ma grand-mère, qui s'appelait
My grandmother, whose name then was Anna Rotkov, was 14 years old at the time of the assassination. She was one of the girls who seemed to have been selected to offer flowers to the princely couple. She never had the occasion to offer them, if the family story is to be believed.
Everything starts in Sarajevo. The history of one family overlaps with world history in the making. Paul Gradvohl wants to understand, is the family account written by his grandmother based on facts or invention? His research leads him to the Jewish Museum in Sarajevo.
My great-grandfather, Moritz Rotkopf, was the head, apparently, of the Jewish community.
Moritz is a Jewish name, yes.
It's Moshe.
Moshe, yes, exactly.
I think. But apparently he was head of the Austro-Hungarians, that is the Ashkenazi community, or had some type of role there. And I wondered if you had information on that, or if you think that that would have to go to the synagogue or?
Yes, maybe you can go in synagogue. They have some book with some names in that time.
Now you can see on this plate that there is a name of your grandfather, Dr. Moritz Rotkopf. He was the president of Jewish community, Anasi, Dr. M. Rotkopf.
Ah, amazing. So he was head of the community?
He was, during 30 years, head of community.
Paul's great-grandfather was a public figure in Sarajevo. The family story about his grandmother being selected to offer flowers to victims of the assassination becomes credible.
The police reacted instantly. After having fired the shot, Princip was arrested on the spot. The investigated wanted to know who was behind the assassination.
None of the conspirators admitted that they acted on behalf of Belgrade. However, the first elements of the investigation show that they were armed, trained, and offered accommodation, and that they could not act by themselves.
During
the questioning, the police quickly discovered that the accused were all giving the same answer. That they fight for the Yugoslavian state, that they're enemies of the Austrian Empire, and that they have no link with Belgrade.
Princip, Gavrinovic, and Grabez. The first trio finally admitted to originating from Belgrade. In Belgrade, Princip and his friends spend their time in cafes, where people talk only politics and the Serbian nation. They are approached by two Serbian officials. Major Vojislav Tankovic, the same officer who refused to take in Gavrilo Princip as a volunteer 1 year earlier, and a certain Milan Ciganovic.
Ciganovic told me that he would give me bombs, but that we needed also some revolvers. He tried to find me some. It all happened in the pub Golden Sturgeon.
Hello. Was this a pub before?
Yes, yes. Long time ago there was a pub.
And Gavrilo Princip, was he here?
How would I know? I'm Chinese. I don't know either. I've just heard that they were meeting here. Yes, yes. According to what I know about these historic events, it is here where they prepared the assassination.
Belgrade, May 27th. The conspirators receive their weapons. They are ordered to commit suicide after the assassination. All three see themselves as martyrs. They train in Topčida Park in the suburbs of Belgrade. Vojislav Tankovic, a major from the Serbian army, trains them in the use of firearms. Princip appears to be the best sniper among them.
Kad su krenuli iz Beograda, otišli su parobrodom do Šapca.
They travelled by boat from Belgrade to Sabac, and then they headed toward Loznica.
The three conspirators travel with a letter issued from Belgrade. This document puts them in contact with a secret network from Belgrade to Sarajevo. Right-hand men await them at every step. Serbian border guards are in the act as well. They guide the conspirators till the river Drina that separates the territories of the two states. Gavrilo Princip and his accomplices managed to cross the border without being noticed.
This is the original. It is valid.
This is the reconstruction of the secret border crossing route taken by Gavrilo Princip.
Après le passage de la frontière, donc sans doute clandestin, de Gavrilo Princip.
Receive these people and make everything you can to help them pass.
The first trio arrives in Sarajevo on June 4th. A second trio is to be recruited on the spot in the following days.
Since the gunshots, since the death of the Archduke, in Sarajevo there were shops that were destroyed. There were people who were ill-treated.
There were violent manifestations against every institution or organization that was considered to be pro-Serbian in Sarajevo. The majority of the population, Croats and Bosnian Muslims alike, strongly showed their disapproval of the assassination by brandishing the pictures of the Austrian Empire in the streets.
After 2 days of riots, a state of emergency is announced. The Austrian Empire decides to compensate owners for damages.
A catastrophe. The heir to the throne is dead. The bodies are quickly transported.
During the days that followed, monarchic Europe was dominated by feelings of astonishment and anger. But soon, these gave way to pragmatism and politics.
It was decided that Franz Ferdinand's wish to be buried next to his wife was going to be respected. And for that, he had the vault built in his castle in Arstetten. It is something very important that every person who wished to reflect in front of the coffins had the right to enter.
François Ferdinand, il a connu une jeune femme qui est...
Franz Ferdinand met a young woman, the Countess Sophie. The meeting took place during a ball and, simply put, it was love at first sight.
C'est le coup de foudre. Nous sommes à une époque où...
It's important to remember we're talking of times when marriages in royal families were only possible among families of the same status.
De rang égal.
Franz Joseph summons his nephew Franz Ferdinand and tells him that it is impossible and he must stop. Franz Ferdinand says that he will never give her up.
Ça a mis 6-7 ans.
It took Franz Ferdinand 6 to 7 years to get the permission from his uncle, the sovereign.
Le mariage est autorisé.
The marriage is authorized, but only as a morganatic marriage.
Ce qui veut dire qu'elle
It meant she would never have the right to reign, would never have the title of empress, and the boys, born from their union, would be excluded from the succession.
Franz Ferdinand was very angry about the status of his wife.
Elle ne peut pas monter dans le même carrosse que son mari.
She can't get on the same carriage as her husband, and when they go together to the theatre, she's not allowed to enter the same imperial box. Vienna, for them, was a place of humiliation.
Pour ce qui concerne Sarajevo,
Franz Ferdinand decides finally to go to Sarajevo, mainly because, for the first time, Sophie will be received with all official respects.
Vont être rendus à Sophie. À Sarajevo,
in Sarajevo, she received the same tributes as him, but also, unfortunately for her, the same fate.
Paul continues to track the history of his family from one war to another, from Sarajevo to Vienna.
Ma grand-mère était encore très jeune, mais quand elle
My grandmother was still young, but when she got married at the end of the war, she left to Vienna. Did she live in this building? I don't know. I don't know, maybe here or maybe at number 4.
Oder hier oder bei Nummer 3. Meine Großeltern und meine Mutter.
My grandparents and my mother lived here. My mother lived here until she turned 16, and then she had to run away.
Ma grand-mère
My grandmother and my mother was still in Vienna when Hitler took over the city, and he addressed everyone at the main square in Vienna, where they lived.
La mairie de Vienne, où ils habitent. Ma famille, qui était d'origine juive,
my family, of Jewish origins, wanted to go to the other side of the Atlantic. They had to pay for that, but they managed to leave.
Cette voiture arrive directement de Sarajevo. Donc
this car came straight from Sarajevo. It's been part of our museum for almost 100 years. The first bullet hit the car, entered here and hit Sophie de Hornberg.
Sophie Hornberg, François Ferdinand.
The second bullet hit Franz Ferdinand. Here we can see the bullet's mark. Yes, below his collar. That's the hole where the bullet entered. Are we in the warehouse? Yeah. Here you have the archives concerning the Habsburgs, the imperial family. There's nothing. I don't understand.
Und gibt es kein Phantom?
Could there be a ghost?
Ja. Wo ist der Karton 1? Der müsste hier sein. Heraussuchen. So, vielleicht wieder rübergehen. Hier sehen Sie Akten vom Konsulat Belgrade.
Here, these are the archives of reports from the consulate of Belgrade.
2 weeks after the assassination in Sarajevo, investigators tracked the names of 2 Serbian state officials, Majors Tankasic and Ciganovic, who participated in the plot. The Austrian government sends Friedrich von Wiesner, an emissary, to Sarajevo to discover if Belgrade is involved. July 13, 1914, Wiesner sends a message.
There is nothing that could prove that the Serbian government was involved in the instigation of the assassination, in the preparations, or in supplying the arms.
The Habsburg government was convinced that Serbia was responsible in one way or another. But 2 weeks after the assassination, they still had no official proof. The Habsburg dynasty reigned over a mosaic of territories and people. There were 11 official nationalities and 9 languages present in parliament in Vienna.
The Austro-Hungarian monarchy, as known to Franz Ferdinand, was a dualism. It meant that one side all the nationalities were under protection of Vienna, on the other side under protection of Hungary. It created a situation where Slavs were not represented and where they didn't have any power. And his project was about setting up some sort of federalism where Slavs could obtain a vote, justified on one hand by their demographic importance and by the historical traditions on the other.
If the monarchy could be reformed, this could become appealing for Slavs. And it could thwart the project of reuniting southern Slavs with Serbia.
Franz Ferdinand was the perfect target. He was the heir apparent, he was visible, and he represented change that might in fact undermine what the Serbian authorities wanted to do. There was genuine fear among Serbian government officials, the conspirators, and others that Franz Ferdinand, if he actually became the emperor, was going to launch a reform effort inside the monarchy.
Franz Ferdinand, as a future sovereign, would hinder our union by carrying out certain reforms that would go against our interests.
According to the court in Vienna, it was obvious that there was a link between the assassins and the government in Belgrade. The Austrian Ministry of Foreign Affairs sends an ultimatum to Serbia to demand the Austrian investigators be allowed to conduct their own investigation in Serbia. In French. Yes, that's the ultimatum. Here's the list, the demands. Point 6. Open the official investigation on the participants in the plot of June 28th, present on the Serbian soil. The official delegations of imperial and royal government are to take part in the investigation. And here point 7. Arrest urgently Commander Vojtech Tankosic and Milan Ciganovic, an employee of the Serbian government incriminated by the findings of the investigation. Belgrade has 48 hours to answer and must agree to every point of the ultimatum.
Ciganovic, Tankosic?
You might ask upstairs.
Fourth alley?
Четвърта.
Fourth alley, it's this way.
The Austro-Hungarian investigation stops in July 1914. Paul Gradvohl continues his efforts to untangle the plot. He discovers a link between Major Tankosic and Ciganovic. Both of them were members of a secret organization, the Black Hand.
In the spring of 1911, a group of men formed a secret group called the Black Hand, Union of Death. A leader in this was Dragut Dmitrievich, or codename Apis.
These film archives show Peter I of Serbia, Prime Minister Pasic, and the famous Colonel Dragutin Dmitrievich, aka Apis, head of intelligence services. He also directs the Black Hand. Paul Gradvohl obtains a copy of the articles of the Black Hand Charter. There is little doubt about the intentions of its members. Article 1. The organization has as aim to achieve the national ideal, union of all Serbian peoples. Article 7. The regions of the Serbian nation are Bosnia-Herzegovina, Dalmatia, Vojvodina, Slavonia, and Montenegro.
The Austrian authorities knew all about the Black Hand. They knew that there was this group of officers, this group of people organized that were a dangerous group. They just didn't make the connection in 1914 that they had been responsible for the actual assassination.
Paul Gradvohl turns his investigation towards a yet little-known event. It took place in 1917 in the middle of World War I. At that moment, Serbia was entirely occupied by Austro-Hungarian forces. Serbian soldiers retreated to Greece, representing the Oriental Front. Secret peace negotiations start between Serbia and Austria-Hungary. Vienna demands punishment for all persons accountable for the assassination in Sarajevo. Faced with these circumstances, on April 2, 1917, members of the Serbian government residing in Salonika, Greece, deploy a secret procedure to get rid of Apis and his accomplices. These unreleased images reveal the last moments of the organizers behind the assassination in Sarajevo. They were executed just a few hours later. Before dying, Apis wrote a letter that his family would reveal only much later. On the occasion of Franz Ferdinand arriving in Sarajevo, I gave orders to organize an assassination. The main participants were from my unit, and they received money. Some of the bills are in the possession of the Russians, since I had been receiving money for this task from Minister Artemonov.
The Apis confessions seem credible despite the context of the trial. They are clear and they show, corroborated with other evidence in our possession, that it was he who orchestrated the whole operation of the attack on Sarajevo. They also show the Russians were partly informed since they partially financed the operation. What they don't show, and that is the mystery we still need to solve, is how much the Serbian government, the Council of Ministers and the Prime Minister knew, or to what degree they were involved in this action.
Since having received the ultimatum, the Serbian government remained permanently in session in Belgrade. Prime Minister Pasic and his ministers remained very hesitant. Before drafting a definitive answer, the Serbs needed to know if they could still count on the Russians for help.
Russia assures Belgrade of its support, which means fundamentally its military support. The royal government of Serbia accepted all points of the ultimatum, except for core points, which endangered the sovereign independency of the country.
The reply that the Serbians put together is very, very adroitly worded so that it looks like it accepts almost all of the demands, except the crucial one, which was collaboration in an investigation of the conspiracy.
Here is a document that states 3 plotters crossed the border in the direction of Sarajevo with 6 bombs and 4 revolvers.
This report, sent by a Serbian agent, reached the authorities in Belgrade. In the original, confiscated by the Austrians during World War I, we can see a handwritten summary by Serbian Prime Minister Nikola Pasic.
This is a memo about young Serbian nationalists crossing the border. It's summarized by Pasic at the end. He simply states that the armed students crossed the border in the direction of Sarajevo. It's a document from 1 month before the assassination.
One of the Serbian ministers, Juba Janovic, wrote,
Mr. Pasic told us the following. Some are getting ready to go to Sarajevo to kill Franz Ferdinand, who will be there on an official visit.
There's now clear proof that the civilian government, the senior officials, including the Prime Minister, knew what was going on.
The court in Vienna,
the army, all started to prepare for war.
The people in Vienna who wanted war were centered around the military, and in particular General Konrad von Hertzendorf, the chief of the Austro-Hungarian General Staff. All he talked about was Krieg, Krieg, Krieg.
The supporters of war were still present, but Franz Ferdinand was no longer there to stop them.
Until that point, Franz Ferdinand had been the principal person arguing for peace inside the Habsburg monarchy. So you have this ironical situation in which the man who was for peace is killed, and he then becomes the pretext for the war which he did not want to have.
Vienna, confident of obtaining support from Germany, believes the conflict can be limited to a regional level.
In reality, Austria thought until the very last moment that Austria-Hungary was going to be only at war with Serbia. But on the other side of the conflict, it was clear that the entire world was already prepared for the escalation of the war.
The Russians were themselves taking military action after the ultimatum was delivered, but before it had been rejected.
Among the secret documents recently declassified by the Serbian Academy of Sciences and Arts, we find a dispatch from Serbian ambassador Miroslav Spalajkovic, sent from Russia to his government in Belgrade.
I'm officially informing you that the Russian army will cross the border the moment Austria-Hungary attacks Serbia. Here, we are looking forward to the beginning of the war. This gives us a unique occasion to take advantage of the situation and to manage the reunification of all the Serbs. It is then desirable for us to be attacked by Austria.
Here is a document of historical significance, a document that triggered the global tragedy. It's a telegram where Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. From that moment, Austria-Hungary considers itself to be at war with Serbia.
The
assassination at Sarajevo, in a series of events which could have been stopped, but which were finally not. The assassination at Sarajevo ended in the First World War.
The man who lit the fuse, Gavrilo Princip, became both a hero and an assassin, depending on the point of view history bestows upon him. In 1917, Austro-Hungarian authorities inaugurate a memorial for the victims, Franz Ferdinand and Sophie. A few years later, the new Yugoslavian government dismantles this memorial and inaugurates a blue plaque for Gavrilo Princip. In April 1941, German soldiers removed the plaque with the pomp and circumstance of a military orchestra and in front of cameras. Following World War II, Communist Yugoslavia installs a new plaque and incorporates Gavrilo Princip's footprints in the sidewalk. He becomes a national hero. In 1992, when the Serbian army starts shelling Sarajevo, all symbols of the assassination are erased, and with them, the memory of the operation, considered as an act of the founding of Yugoslavia. Today, local authorities in Sarajevo decide to engrave a new text on a stone plaque.
Today, the text is simple. Here, on June 28, 1914, Gavrilo Princip killed the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, Franz Ferdinand, and his wife Sophie. This way, no one is being judged, neither the assassin nor the assassinated.